It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! Live Feedback Friday, supposed to be last week. This week instead. Gonna start while the chat is building, because I only put up the link a couple minutes ago. But gonna start responding to feedback for the week. The first thing I want to deal with, because a lot of different people asked this question, was and people who join the chat are going to miss this one, but yeah, people who watch it afterwards, which is the vast majority, they will be able to go back and see this answer, because I think it's important. Oh, this is weird. The YouTube link posted in Portuguese. I'm just looking at my Twitter feed. That's really bizarre. It posted in, oh geez, my computer is transmitting audio. Whoops. Okay. Let's stop that from happening. Yay, go computer. But yeah, the commercial's still running for oh really? The chat says that the link is wrong on the non-Portuguese one. That is bizarre. Let me check this out. No? Okay, it's playing. How weird. Okay, so people are in the chat. Sorry, chat. That was a weird YouTube thing. YouTube thinks I'm Portuguese. I like peri peri spice very much, but I don't understand that. But yeah, you guys haven't missed anything. It's just, I was just doing a little setup thing. If at any point you get audio lag during this, just refresh and it should catch up. We were having this problem on the EdTheSoc Live last night too. Some users were getting, the video would freeze, but the audio would continue. Some weren't. So I guess it's just a connection thing, but I don't know. The first thing I want to touch is the probably the most repeated comment on Tuesday's video is, where does the 2 to 8% crime stat come from? With this is what we should expect with the unfounded rape accusations. And that statistic is the accepted one that comes from the FBI. And it's accepted for multiple reasons. The first of which is the FBI has the largest base of data to draw from. Canada's numbers are dwarfed by the American ones, but our societies aren't that different. And the FBI has published all crime statistics for quite some time now. So this is considered the most reliable statistic. Now, no statistic is 100% reliable, but it's the best we have. The other thing about the FBI number of 2 to 8%, some people say it's 2 to 10%. It's the way the average of the data is interpreted. So some people say it's 2 to 8%. Some people say it's 2 to 10%. So I just want to give that caveat here. Yeah, it's the 2 to 8%, closer to 2, but 2 to 8% is also the general false reporting statistic for all crimes. And I think that's good, because, you know, one of my complaints with how sexual assault is treated in the media is the fact that they make sexual assault some sort of special crime, as opposed to it being a violent crime connected to things like, you know, murder and simple assault. And so we don't expect the false reporting statistics to be much outside of, you know, everything else when it comes to Time to Japan. If you don't stop spamming the chat, I will ban you. It's getting annoying, because that means I lose the comments of other people. So that's a warning. Thanks. Come on, be cool. Yeah, that's where that number comes from. I know some people argue this, like, no, it's more like 20%. There is no consistent data to what we are talking about here. Is not insufficient evidence. Okay, Time to Japan is going to behave. Good. Thank you, Time to Japan. What we are looking at with this unfounded stat is not lack of evidence, not insufficient evidence to lay a charge. These are statistics that are crimes that have been found to be not provably, because that's a standard that we don't get until we get to court, but the police determined that there is actually evidence contrary to it being legitimate. And that's in these cases when there is a rape kit that is not tested and there are witnesses that haven't been interviewed. This is concerning because they're basically determining this person is either mistaken, and by that they mean they misidentified the accuser, so the accused, which does happen, or they're just flat out lying. And it's really hard to believe that you can determine a case is unfounded when there's an untested rape kit. That's the big issue. And the reason I've been focusing on this issue is because it actually is something with an edge. We can look at it. We can examine the merits of these things. And I mean, the case study in that Globe and Mail article, there were multiple witnesses. There was forensic evidence. There was photographs, and it was still determined to be unfounded. And they actually posted the whole police interview. It was a really good piece of, okay, people are posting statistics in the chat. I'm just going to say, guys, take these statistics with a grain of salt. Someone is quoting a statistic that violence against gay partners is the highest rate of violence against partner is found in lesbian couples, 80%. That's actually not true. That is the high end of a very wide statistic that is 17 to 80%. What that study found was that there isn't enough data. It needs to be studied. And I think that's a fair thing to say. I think more study is good on things like this, but you hear people quoting the high end of this range, and it's just not so. This would be the equivalent of me saying, oh, 2% of cases are falsely reported, instead of me saying the actual statistic, which is 2 to 8% or 2 to 10%. So please be careful with your statistics. Somebody else in the chat asked what a pederast is. A pederast is basically somebody who is sexually attracted to teenagers as opposed to prepubescent children. And it's, I hate that it's controversial, but it is controversial because some people think basically they subscribe to the mentality of if there's grass on the field, play ball. That if someone is, sexually, physically mature, then it should be okay to have sex with them. And the problem is they find that the psychological impact, I'm trying to figure out how to word this, the psychological impact of a real experience imbalance between sex partners is that the younger partner ends up overly valuing their worth by their sexual appeal. So they undervalue other qualities like their intelligence, their sense of humor, their, usefulness. That is an issue and I work with some youth groups and some youth leaders, and this is a thing that's constantly that's constantly, and yes, pederasty is associated with homosexuality. I'm trying to use non-gendered terms because the chat is already going on about, oh, men are lectured about sexual violence and all that stuff. And yes, that's true. But Orkar, you jumped from quoting a faulty statistic to saying, sure, statistics are always biased or fake. Well, then don't lead with it. You know, if you don't want me to challenge your statistic, then don't inaccurately cite a statistic and then move the goalposts. Like, guys, okay, we need to focus on facts here, okay? And for the record, and other people in this chat can back me up, I have never made sexual assault something that just happens to women. This is something that's very important to me. And okay, this is somebody asked a question that's connected, and I'm going to move on to that. The question is, what do you think of when women statutory rape boys and the media acts like student seduces teacher? I was tweeting about this when Riverdale premiered. I have a real issue with this. I have a real issue with the media depiction of these women who prey on younger boys. They are predators. They are. The women that do this tell different lies to themselves about why they're doing something, but these women are predators. And my God, on Riverdale, what is it? You know, Mrs. Grundy, they always show her hiding demure and hiding behind her hair, like she's somehow a victim of society. And oh, she has these feelings for Archie, and she can't help that he suddenly got these muscles. And it's wrong. It's wrong. Teachers, no matter what gender, should not be sleeping with their students, period, because it's not just that they're older. They're in a position of authority. And I have a real issue because when I was in school, we had this one young teacher. She was a geography teacher. And she had a bit of a problem because she was being sexualized by, you know, not just students, but there was sort of this, oh, you know, there was a different standard applied to her. And it's not fair because she wasn't dressing sexy. She just happened to be young and pretty. And there was definitely a different treatment of her. And if we continue to minimize when a teenaged boy is preyed upon by a female adult in a position of authority, not only are those boys less likely to come forward and talk about what happened, to recognize it as assault, the women are, you know, there's problems on both sides. I think it's wrong. And so I hope that answered that question. Somebody else is talking about the double standard in prison time when it comes to, well, I'm just going to say all crimes. And this is something I've talked about, gender gap in prison sentencing. And this is something I've talked about more than once, but it bears repeating because a lot of people don't know this. Way back in the first ever feminist conference in the United States, the Seneca Falls Convention, one of the declaration of sentiments, one of the things that they complained about that women wanted equality on was equality of accountability in the law. And at the time, women were not even seen to be legally culpable when they committed a crime with their husband. And these women had a problem with this, and rightly so. And this is one of the ongoing, unresolved issues in terms of the feminist movement, that women are still, there is still a huge disparity in sentencing and length of sentencing and likelihood of sentencing and so on and so forth between men and women. And this is because women are seen as less accountable by society. Now, this may seem like a good thing short term, but if a person has an ingrained bias regarding the inherent accountability of a person, they are less likely to trust that person as a leader. And so this is linked to the issues involving female leadership. And it's a real problem. And it's something that the original feminists back in the day, the Quakers that all got together. Yes, the original feminist convention was run by Quakers. And that's why voting franchise became the hot button controversial issue of that convention, because many of the men didn't even vote. And women were saying, we want the right to vote. And the men were going, wait a minute, because the Quakers at the time didn't actually recognize the government, the secular government of America as having any power over them. They thought they were only, commended by God and not some, earthly government. And so that's, believe it or not, why voting franchise became the big thing. But it's that was right. And I really recommend going and looking, if you got a moment, looking up the original Declaration of Sentiments, because it is the founding document of the feminist movement before Marxism got into it. And that's important for two reasons, because it shows that feminism is not entirely Marxist inspired, but it also shows that some of these issues that are seen to be, MRM, MRA issues, there's actually common ground, or there should be common ground. The issue is that the much more popularized form of feminism from England, sadly, because they were blowing shit up and committing violence, it's flashier. That became sort of what we saw, retroactively as first wave feminism. And it wasn't that in the US. Sorry, I'm umming a lot, guys, because I'm trying to get onto your questions, and you guys are saying a lot of interesting things in the chat. So I'm going to leave it there and move on to what you guys are saying. Look, this is in my Gamer's Guide to Feminism. It's in my, I forget what the actual video is called, but my stuff on the first wave. All this is there. And people are saying, I have seen feminist writers saying that it's wrong to jail women, this, that, and the next thing. Yeah, I have seen those articles. I've seen those articles. And all I can say is that there is no governing body licensing feminists. Feminist is one of these things that people self-define as. And you guys know what I say, that 80% of everything is junk. It's true of everything. And that includes feminism. There's a lot of people going, I'm a feminist, and they haven't read a single book. They haven't, done the slightest bit of research, and they are getting their ideas from the decidedly Marxist traditions in feminism that started in the sex negative wing of the second wave. And Betty Friedan was, you got to remember, Betty Friedan was, her job before she got fired for getting pregnant was for a union trade publication. And, unions have their origins in syndicalism, which is you know, definitely tied to Marxism. So there definitely is that influence starting in the second wave, but that was some of the issue. That was the big, you know, weak spot of the second wave, is they have this idea that they have to have 100% agreement because everything is a class. And this is becoming a real problem in modern day, because I don't know if you guys followed the Walmart gender discrimination complaint. The judge ruled that women were too large a group to be considered a class. And it's like, whoa, that's bizarre. But yeah, class-based thinking has a real issue now. Someone asked in the chat about rape culture and the myths about only women getting raped and only, you know, men not, and all that stuff. This is a tricky thing, because the definition of rape culture from the 1970s doesn't apply anymore, because that was the normalization and minimization of rape. And that's not happening anymore. We've gone to the other side of the ellipse of stupid and made it a fate worse than death. And this is becoming a problem with people attempting to move on with their lives after they've been sexually assaulted, because it's this weird kind of scarlet letter where you have to let it define your entire being. And that is a form of rape myth. And one could argue it is a new form of rape culture, but it is not the definition of rape culture that was defined in the 1970s. Now, I will say rape culture has never been an official term. Never. It's a colloquialism designed to describe stuff. It is not a clearly defined term even. It is not a, there is no accepted no single accepted definition. It's one of those things like manspreading and mansplaining. These are just colloquial populist terms. They're not guiding principles or official definitions. And some people take them to be that, but they're not that. And that's the unfortunate thing. Somebody else asked about the draft and whether I believe in equality of the draft. Yes, absolutely. I understand that back in the day when things were, you know, lugging heavy mortar shells in wood crates across deserts, that there was a need for increased upper body strength. Now, the fact that things like, you know, drone piloting and, you know, signal operators and all these jobs that are far more technical and skilled as opposed to brute force labor, there is absolutely no reason that women shouldn't be included in any future drafts. Now, I don't think that we're going to see a draft anytime soon because they're so unpopular. Vietnam kind of ruined the draft for the foreseeable future. Now, there are countries around the world that have, you know, that have both, you know, both genders drafted everybody, like every adult of a certain age in Israel, except for Orthodox Jews. And this is a big argument there. But they have to serve in the military, men and women alike, and women do very, very well there. There's really cool pictures of, you know, all these women with these, you know, machine guns on their backs. But yeah, there's gender neutral compulsory military service in Israel. No, it's not entirely gender neutral because it's only Orthodox Jewish men, I believe, because they get a study deferment. I could be wrong on that though. But it works quite well because of the fact that how do I put this? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll move on. Hopefully that answers your question. Somebody asked, could you please recommend a couple books to understand what has shaped today's feminism? That's tough. And I'll tell you why it's tough. Because there is no one feminism. And so any book recommendation would leave out a huge portion because various wings of feminism really don't like each other. There is a huge divide between sex positive feminists and sex negative feminists. There is a huge divide between the capitalists and the Marxists. There are, I mean, you're talking about a movement that encompasses Lady Gaga, Beyonce, and Katy Perry on one extreme, and then, you know, the Dorksiders that kind of eschew all attempts to be conventionally physically attractive and get mad if you tell someone to smile on the other. It's difficult to recommend a single book that encompasses all of it. Gail Collins has a book that attempts to. The name is blanking. Gail Collins, for people who don't know, is a columnist for the New York Times. But I'll see if I can get the name up really fast. When Everything Changed. That starts in the second wave. So it's not everything. And this is the issue, is there's no one book. And so what I tried to do on Gamer's Guide to Feminism is give people sort of a Coles Notes version of the big things that apply to gaming, because there's certain elements of feminism that really don't apply to gaming at all, right? Because when we're talking, for instance, about gender performance of a character, we're not dealing with biological gender at all. A video game character has no biological gender unless it's in Watch Dogs 2. You know, biological sex. I'm sorry, gender is inherently social. But so we don't see vag or peen, you know, it's all gender performance. And that's why I think Butler works very well. Because we don't have to get into the wonky parts of her theory that gender is entirely performance. There's no biological basis for differences. Somebody asked, do I consider egalitarianism to be a subgroup of feminism, and how your own subgroup of feminism is different? See, now we're getting into terms. And I understand terms are important. I understand clarity, like being able to communicate ideas to each other is important. Some people would consider themselves egalitarian feminists. I forget what Christina Hoff Sommers calls herself. I'm blanking, but it's essentially that. I personally do believe in... it's interesting because the musical artist Chaos talked about this involving race, and he believes, and I think this is really equity feminism. That's right. Thank you, Chad. That's what Christina Hoff Sommers calls it. But he says that even this idea of equality is not what we should be striving for. We should be striving for equivalency, which means valuing differences, meaning that, you know, one person's approach to something is equivalent to another person's. They're not equal. They're not identical, but they are equivalent. They are substitutions. You know, it's the difference between an NVIDIA video card and an AMD video card. And I would like to not touch an AMD video card ever, 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 but I'm forced to for the Ed the Sock Show. And yes, it gets the job done mostly. And there's, you know, they do things in different ways, but they do the same purpose. And I can't say an AMD video card is bad. I just prefer NVIDIA. And so that's sort of where I come at that. I know we talk about false equivalencies, but we have to be careful about false equations. Because when we say equal, it means, you know, the left side of the equation balances the right side of the equation. And that's not necessarily an obtainable goal. And my concern with the way things are coming about now is that I think they're trying to they're trying to be too narrow on issues. Like, we have to deal with this issue now. And this other group's going, we need to deal with this issue now. Instead of going, okay, is there any overlap between these 6 issues that we can address and deal with all of it at once? And the problem with a lot of protest activism is that, how do I put this? They are trying to get so many people showing up to their rallies to say, we had this many people, take us seriously, that I sounded like Mr. Hanky there. Howdy ho, protesters. But they're trying to say, take us seriously. There's all these people, but they don't actually have a list of, this is what we want to get accomplished. This is what we want to see. It's much more productive, I think, what's going on in America, like right now, where people are showing up at town hall meetings and directly talking to their elected representatives about the things that matter to them. And that is a much more effective, because politicians wanted to get reelected. And if you are directly having a conversation that with them, stuff can get done. Going out and carrying a sign makes a great photo op, but it doesn't give individual politicians the cover, because that's what it's all about with politics. Will this get me reelected? So I'm trying to figure out how to put this. They do not care much about protests because protests happen all the time. I guess that's the best thing to do. And somebody brought up Jason Chaffetz in the chat. Yes, he did walk out of the meeting. However, he's also now sent a letter to the ethics committee, co-signed with a Democrat. It was a bipartisan letter asking the ethics office to look into the Kellyanne Conway situation. And Jason Chaffetz is hyper partisan. Oh, this is an interesting question. How do you feel about body shaming? I know it can be malicious sometimes, but in my case, it helped my health and encouraged me to get on a treadmill. Okay, being concerned about another person's health is not body shaming. That's not the same thing. Body shaming is specifically a cosmetic thing. So like Lady Gaga at the Super Bowl, like Gaga is clearly able to do all that crazy dancing and running around and jumping off roofs and falling through the earth at the end and all that stuff, you know, like that Mortal Kombat thing where Quan Chi is like just falling forever. She's clearly not out of shape. She is clearly physically fit. She is clearly at least physically healthy. She's addressing her mental health issues. So for people to talk about an inch of belly fat on her stomach, that is body shaming. When people are saying that you need to get healthy because your weight is killing you, that is not an aesthetic. That is not an aesthetic thing. That is no different than trying to get somebody to quit smoking or quit problem drinking or quit drug abuse. I was really not sure about that show, My 600-Pound Life. But I've been started watching it lately because I tried it in case I get asked on this stuff. And I actually found the beginning of the episode is just modern day sideshow. It's the morality plays that used to come with the fat lady at the sideshows, which is a very interesting part of history in and of itself. But the by the end of the show, it's very affirming to me, and I think it really humanizes the people who are featured in the show. And I like that because it treats them as individuals. I mean, the way they frame it at the beginning of each show, they give the statistics, but then they say, this is like Crystal's story, or this is Brian's story. And they're humanizing them. They're making them an individual. And I think that, I think that's very different than just getting on somebody for a cosmetic thing that has no impact on their health. So a lot of questions came in when I was talking about this. Information security question, yes, ask it, please. One person says, I think this is the question I missed. What do you think about the idea that a lot of the labeling terminology, 72 plus orientations, etc., as young people trying to find an identity? I think, oh man, okay, my attitudes on this whole gender identity thing are admittedly controversial. I'm going to tread lightly here. My own opinion is that gender means too much in modern day discourse. People think that gender means you know, if you're a woman, you wear makeup or you have long hair, and even that's not true anymore. You wear dresses, you do this sort of thing. And that actually has nothing to do with biological sex. The reason men started wearing pants is that high status men wore horses. Look it up. It's true that pants are the variation. Everybody wore like togas or kilt type things. I forget what the Greek garment was called, but pants were the new thing. Everybody wore skirts or dresses, for lack of a better term, back in the day. And so we are taking these things that are actually fashion. They are actually gender signifiers that we've determined somewhat by arbitrary consensus mean something about biological gender. And that's the whole gender. The chat, someone in the chat just said, I don't understand how a movement identifies that gender as a construct. And instead of telling people to care less about it, they tell people to care more. Yes, absolutely. That is, in my opinion, a misreading of Butler's gender performativity theory, that by rallying people to perform subversive acts of gender, instead of it getting to the point that we care less about these things, they have made it mean more. Now this is a social thing as well. And this comes from the stuff I've had to do on religious minorities, but we are in a time of what my colleague Stuart Parker calls a high tension environment, meaning groups, organizations that cause you to have to remove from society, cut off, that whole thing, are seeing growths in membership. So the harder it is to be a part of the group, the more it isolates you from greater society, the more the appeal of the group has in recent memory. And that is a sign of the times. I think that if we weren't so freaking out about punching him, the comments Richard Spencer are making about identitarianism, I think that's actually, I don't think he means to, but it is the most on point about the radical right and the radical left. I think, identitarianism is kind of the thing. I am really, it is very hard for me to get excited about 90 different pronouns. I completely understand a person's, because this is a developmental thing, right? People learn to set boundaries, and we live in a time with ride sharing and house sharing and spit sharing and food sharing and everything sharing, that, I mean, there's a medical treatment where people share their shit, boundaries are eroding. And I think some people are using gender to reassert the contours and the edges of who they are. And as someone who would be poop to poop protocol, yeah. Sorry, chat, for people who are watching this later, somebody said something funny in chat. But as somebody who would be defined as gender non-conforming, who doesn't really consider myself gender non-conforming, back in the day, it was just like, you're a tomboy, now you're gender non-conforming. I'm an individual. And my whole thing, was being a girl shouldn't define me as being inherently different from a boy when it comes to interests and things like that. Now, I understand there are some proven sex differences in the brain, but that's female typical and male typical brain. It's possible I don't have a female typical brain. And the big question is, what happens to people like me? And I think that is the conversation that's getting lost in this pronoun war. Like, it's less important what you call someone than how you treat someone. And yes, respecting what an individual wants to be called is part of that. But I think I know that there are certain friends who say things that kind of make me go, but I know they don't mean anything by it, so I don't make it an issue. And that's very different than a total stranger coming up to you and saying something to you that you would accept from a friend, but not from a stranger. And like, that to me is it. You earn the right to be snarky with people when somebody has your back. They can, get away with more, for lack of a better term. And I think that nowadays people are not forming those bonds the same way. And that to me is part of the issue. There's certain things that I don't particularly like personally, but don't complain about them because it's not a big enough deal. Like, just because I don't personally like it doesn't mean I think it's harmful. And if other people think it's funny, that's great. Humor is very subjective. Like, trust me, I hear about how subjectively people can't stand the Ed the Sock Show every Thursday night. Yeah, well, the chat says, why is it important to know someone first? Is because it's easier to understand their intent? Yeah, absolutely. And also, You take criticism from people who care about you, because then, yeah, you know their intent is to help you. There are a lot of people out there who use criticism to tear people down instead of building them up. And this is unfortunate because criticism from the right, with the right intents, applied the right way, is incredibly important to respectful relationships, is actually essential to respectful relationships. People who respect each other know how to criticize each other in a way that will make a person better instead of making them fall apart. And that, I feel, is really, some people would say it's lost. I'm not sure it was ever there in some groups. I mean, you certainly can't get it in a class-based structure, because then people think, oh, you are this, therefore, you are defined by this set of checked boxes. And that's just, really not so with me. Part of the reason I am interested in gender, part of the reason I self-identify as a feminist, because I got sick and tired of being called a unicorn instead of just a gamer, for instance. I got sick of everybody thinking that, the 3 guys I played D&D with in the 6th grade were normal and I was strange. And I don't see anything about Dungeons and Dragons that inherently does not appeal to women, because you can make those stories anything you want. And I remember when the first time I played Dungeons and Dragons ever, I'm like, woo, because I like the dice. I'm like, what are those? It's 20-sided dice. Ooh, tell me more. Numbers. And we sat down and they were like, you can be, a fighter, priest, rogue, wizard. And I'm like, wizard? I don't want to be wizard. Can it be a sorceress? And they paused a bit and said, okay. And this was before sorcerer and sorceress were an actual sub-kit, because this was 2nd ed, advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, old school. But that was what I liked about it. And the fact that, the chances there was somewhere playing D&D was considered normal in the 1980s. I grew up in a very immigrant-heavy neighborhood. And so anything that was a book with words that encouraged kids to interact with the English language, teachers were awesome with. It was a very different paradigm. No one was particularly worried about kids turning to Satan. There were much greater issues. And so, yeah, there was a place. The nice thing about growing up in a low-income neighborhood where there were a lot of, socioeconomic problems was that D&D was acceptable. There was that IT security question back in the day that I wanted to get to. Let me see if I can find it. Excuse me. It was a while back. That question took longer to answer than I thought. Okay. Purple icon. Okay. We should always take personal responsibility for our safety. Thus, becoming anonymous is ideal to minimize the risk of harm. Is there an ideal solution to become a credible voice on the internet while remaining safe? Okay. That's a 2-part question. One is an assumption that being anonymous, I missed a part. So the full question is, we should always take personal responsibility for our safety. Thus, becoming anonymous is ideal to minimize the risk of harm. Yet no one will take us seriously and discussion will naturally be less civil. If we want to be credible, we must use our real name, which puts us at risk. Is there an ideal solution to become a credible voice on the internet while remaining safe? Now, this is something I struggle with myself, because I connect an internet anonymity to the anonymous pamphlet writing of the French Revolution. I wrote an article on this that got purchased and then not published a few years back, which is the worst thing that can happen, because now I can't release the article. It was bought. It's owned by the people that paid me back in the day that you got paid really good money for doing a think piece like that. But the way the pamphleting worked in that time when the printing press was new and interesting, the way the internet is now, is that people used anonymous pamphlets to say things they couldn't say as a person who could be rounded up and arrested. Now, they always got found out eventually. There's very few pamphleteers that maintain their anonymity forever. It was an ability, it was a tool to buy time. And I mean, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was initially published, I don't remember if under a pen name or anonymously, but it was because she was a woman and they didn't think that a book of that sort would be accepted. And so I don't think that anonymity necessarily keeps you safe, because that presupposes that internet interactions are inherently unsafe. And they're annoying, they're exhausting, they can take a toll on your mental health, but physically unsafe, that is actually the minority of unpleasant interactions on the internet. And so I think that people overvalue the protective quality of anonymity. I think that, yeah, people in the chat pointed out the whole thing about employment. Now, I personally think employers are a little too skittish. In my opinion, social media, we are in an age much like the Victorian era of everybody came in from the country where they were working the fields and into the cities where they were living much more closely together. Sorry, Adrian, can you repeat your question? I missed it. When people were living much more closely together, you got this golden age of eccentricity. And so I would like to see that happen again. And I think to an extent it is. But there is this real culture of fear surrounding online interactions. And, somebody in the chat just said, basically, I don't want my potential employer to Google my name and find my Twitter. Okay, yes, that's so. But this is a person who I know because I recognize the name. This is a pseudonym, not anonymity. And Adrian, I got your question that time. I'll get to it next. Thanks. A pseudonym and anonymity are not the same thing. A pseudonym is like, what is her name? Stephanie Gagliano being Lady Gaga. But she is Lady Gaga professionally. And so while we're supposed to recognize that that is a persona and not all of her, the same way Nicki Minaj and Madonna and Cher adopt personas, this is not the same as being anonymous. And that's important to understand. You can build a consistent identity online that is not necessarily your real name and doesn't necessarily show your face, but can have one with a reputation. You are using the same screen name across different platforms. Someone can link your opinions to each other, if not necessarily your work. And I think that's fairly wise nowadays. It says, I get that, but not using your real identity allows identity politics to not be used against for you. Okay, you're talking to the wrong person here, because I believe that even the most abhorrent people are right sometimes, and we shouldn't completely tune things out. Behavior is a lot more important than identity, with caveats. I do think that yes, magic-based. If you use magic-based across multiple platforms, you are a pseudonym. You will hear me say, a couple people said, what's that mean? When I did my Dishonored 2 video, and I said that the reviewer for Feminist Frequency was performing as female is because I don't know in real life whether this person is in fact female. They may be only female on the internet. And so performative identity is a thing on the internet. You know, they have shown that that really matters. And it is philosophically, some people would advocate for the right to perform in any way they want on the internet. So that's my sort of thought. I'm an advocate of pseudonyms, not total anonymity. If you want to be seen as a voice, if you want to be taken seriously, but then keep in mind that your real identity becomes something of value that people will look to find and use. That I learned that the hard way because I deliberately I didn't say pretending to be a woman on the internet, guys. I said performing as a woman. That's not the same. This is Butler again. Don't twist my words. You know I don't like that. Don't straw man. But what was I saying? I don't remember now. Basically that if you look at certain people, you know, they went on anonymously and then they got found out and it became this big thing. I remember what I was saying. I originally did not use my last name professionally because it made it easier to figure out who was contacting me, who knew me personally, and who didn't. I also like the Kafka reference, but it was actually a really great piece of advice a porn star gave me. Never use your real name. Never, ever, ever. But journalists, this is part of the reason I was kind of sympathetic to, I was more sympathetic to Gamergate than most journalists were. But this is the unique thing about me. I've been on the other side of the equation. A lot of journalists haven't. So I know what it's like to read an article and it's like, this is me and I don't know this person. But journalists have this habit of publishing someone's professional name and then publishing their real name. And they don't realize, please don't do that. If we wanted to use our real names, we'd use our real names. There's a reason we don't. And so in the modern so-called journalistic landscape, pseudonyms are a nice performative gesture. And so I tend to use Leanna K for comedy and Leanna Kersner for my more analytical stuff. But I've dropped that almost entirely because, people pick the one they want. And it's really frustrating because the press denied me my ability to do my job in a way I felt the most comfortable. And that was very frustrating. So when people started talking about, the abuses of the press and some irresponsible behavior and stuff like that, I'm like, yeah, I'd be a real hypocrite for not acknowledging that they have a point because, I recognize that the press, if they decide to reveal something about you, you can't really tell them not to. Then they start arguing freedom of the press, and it's funny. They are happy to, participate in how the sausage is made, to use the euphemism. It was also having a hard time pronouncing the last name, Chatter. That was part of it. But at this point, I had to learn names. I remember when someone like Chantal Kreviazuk or Christina Aguilera came through Much Music, and that actually is how you pronounce her last name, Aguilera. People say Aguilera. Her dad was from Ecuador, but everybody butchered it. You're expected to learn how to say people's names. And the fact that people don't anymore says something. But yeah, there's that question. And now 2 people are asking it. And I have to find it again. The chat is moving really fast today, which is great. I just apologize. Okay, here we go. This person asked, why do so many women like romantic stories with clear abuse in them? And this is a good question. I need Red Bull for this one. Okay. Yeah, I need a minute. It's 2-pronged. 3-pronged, actually, and they're all linked together. And I'm trying to figure out how to untangle the spaghetti and get to the bottom of this. I think it connects to the writings of Jane Austen being treated as straight up romances instead of being very cynical, socially satirical works. And because that was misinterpreted, I mean, I remember whenever they ran that damn Sense and Sensibility miniseries on TV with what's his name, the guy who was also in Bridget Jones, like Colin Firth or something like that. And my mother and my sister, oh, Mr. Darcy. And I'm like, I hate everything about this. And that means I have to go play video games in the black and white TV because we only had 2 TVs and the only one was color. And it's like, you know, fuck me, you're taking time away from my Sega. Wonder Boy's calling. Altered Beast, what are you doing? And they treated, oh, he's so dreamy. And I'm like, I want to punch this guy in the face. And Pride and Prejudice, that's right. That's what it was called. And I was instantly repelled by this thing for all the reasons that you're supposed to be repelled by this thing, but most people aren't because it's treated as this great romantic thing. And we have a real issue. I mean, it goes the other way too, right? Because a huge part of this romance, as we see it traditionally, is women dropping hints and men having to interpret them instead of women just coming out and saying what they really mean. And that's a form of psychological abuse too. I mean, you have to remember that these traditions, the romantic traditions, what romance originally meant was books that eschewed reason and focused on these massive, overwhelming emotional experiences. But that period was defined by guys like Lord Byron, who were real pieces of garbage. I mean, we get the Byronic hero because Byron wrote constant self-inserts. I mean, I don't know why people don't do, you know, Lord Byron, Marty Stew, but it was supposed to be about big emotional experiences, not necessarily good ones, just overwhelming ones. And now it's become about almost like urban fairy tales. And I don't find most romance romantic. I mean, to me, one of the most romantic moments in literature didn't make it into the movie version of Lord of the Rings. It was in the book with Éowyn and Faramir in the garden at the end, where Faramir is basically like, you know, I'm never going to be king, right? And Éowyn's like, I know, because she was like the only person in the damn book who realized that Aragorn was a flaming jerk. And it was the whole, he might be a great man, capital G, capital M, but he's not great for me. This guy is better for me. And I think that's one of the most romantic scenes in literature, because it was actually two people engaging as equals, and it was incredibly different from Éowyn and Aragorn, and that was inherently a tragic relationship. And I get why they changed it. But there was this whole domino effect in the Lord of the Rings that stopped that from happening. And now we get these romantic comedies that are neither funny nor romantic. The movie that killed me, that it was that Amy Adams movie, Enchanted, and it was this great movie, but they resolve it by she takes Patrick Dempsey's credit card, goes on a shopping spree with his daughter. They bond over manicures and pedicures, and the big OMG I love you is not in her unique special dresses that she made out of curtains, which is what made the character lovable, because she was different and unique and made her own choices, but in a designer dress, and she's just been completely like assimilated into consumer culture. And I'm sitting here going, and it was such a cute movie up until that point, but there's so much conformity in romantic comedies, and that's because modern romance is designed to sell products. It's designed to sell that hair dye. It's designed to sell that gym membership. It's designed to, all these things. And happy people don't buy expensive cosmetic products because they're happy as they are. They're like, I'm fine with my hair being brown. Why do I want it to be blonde? If you want your hair to be blonde, dye your hair blonde, but don't do it because you think that you'll like them better. I think as well that it's very hard to make a romantic comedy in the age of hookup culture. What show was I watching? Oh yeah, it was Legends of Tomorrow, where what's the guy that turns to steel? I get confused because Captain Steel or something like that, because Steel's a black guy to me, but he's talking about how people just relationships chill nowadays. He's trying to convince a woman from the 1940s to have sex with him by insisting that all relationships are the same in 2016, 2017. I'm like, again, it just, and it was supposed to be this kind of romantic thing. And then she's like, no, I think we should just stay friends. Ha ha, wah, wah. It was awful. Citizen Steel, that's right, that's his name. And people are noticing my Chechkas in the background. Let's show them because this has been heavy. So here's my Moogle with the wings. I still want to make Momo a Moogle costume because I like Moogles. Lulu's my favorite Final Fantasy character because she had, that is a Moogle. And then I have my Ivy Valentine. I don't know what you call these things, but I love this toy because the screen is totally blowing it out. Maybe if I get closer, you can see it. But I love this because people treat Ivy as defined by body parts you can't see very well here. And I like the fact that even when you take away that physicality, it's still Ivy. So I like that. And then there's Raving Rabbit. He's a Wii U remote charger. Sorry, a Wii charger, so I can't pick him up. And then I have Batmite, because I love Batmite. And then I've showed Muffet the Daggett before, rest in peace, Richard Hatch, but there's Muffet the Daggett. And then I have Big Daddy and Big Sister from BioShock. And I would pick them up, but they don't stand up very well. This was that one that came with the special edition BioShock collectors thing, so they made us all buy the game the second time. But I thought it was a toy that I'd be able to pose, and it's not. It's just like a solid thing that if you blow on the wrong way, it goes boom. And so, yeah, that was majorly disappointing. If something looks like a toy, it should be a toy, not a chunk of, I don't even know what this is. They just put it in a mold. It's heavy as anything. And it's not metal, but it's supposed to be metal. It's some kind of poured mold, and there's like air bubbles all through it. But yeah, that was just me getting off heavy. Okay, this will be my last question for this. We are definitely going to have to do more. Oh, people mentioned the wolf. The wolf is freaking gone. I banished the freaking wolf. Better not be back. No, it's not back. Okay, good. That wolf scared the crap out of me. But I'll take the last question. We're definitely going to have to do more of this because it's been very busy. 85 people watching live. That's pretty good for me. Resin, you're right. That's probably what it is, chatter. Somebody asked what I think of 50 Shades of Grey. And it's interesting, it's one of these topics. There are a lot of topics that people bring up that I feel like I've talked to death. And obviously they missed my opinions. And this is why I tried to consolidate a lot of my media and stop writing for a bunch of different services to do it all myself, because people miss stuff. And somebody said they wish women had decent porn. There actually is decent porn for women. Digital Playground is a company that it's two sisters that run the country, and they're very female-friendly porn. And their stars are super smart. I love the one thing I miss about my old job is I miss hanging out with porn stars because they are crazy fun and they are awesome to talk to, and they are very real people. The women, I mean, the guys are a little standoffish. They're kind of shy, which is interesting. But the female porn stars, fabulous people, fabulous people. Have I played? I have not played 5th yet. I was so bored by 4th that I haven't played 5th edition D&D. But getting back to 50 Shades of Grey, when it first came out, there was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of concern from the BDSM community, and it was really understandable. Because 50 Shades is not BDSM. It's just an abusive damn relationship. And, you know, in it's similar to Twilight in some ways that women have to prove their worthiness for a guy by putting themselves in harm's way. And it's interesting because we tell stories about men like this all the time, and we don't see them as abusive, but that was the chivalric tradition, so it was slightly different. The relationship in 50 Shades of Grey is just, it's really easy to say it's gross, but I think that gives it too much credit. It is Twilight fan fiction with the names changed, and you can tell, with a slightly more defined, less stupid Bella Swan with, what's her name? Anastasia something. I don't frickin' know, but every time I see a story and it's got that romance novel name, I won't read it. Well, I had to read these books for obvious reasons. I had to do a paper on Mormon cosmology in the Twilight Saga. But it's the thing that really puts me off about 50 Shades and the whole BDSM thing is that there's scenes in it where he commits violence against her when he's angry. And that is not fetish play. That is not two partners doing something for their mutual sexual gratification. That is abuse. And don't dom angry is a thing for a reason. It's funny somebody brought up Jane Jensen, because I can see why in this. I love Jane. I think it's so funny that Gabriel Knight would probably be seen as this horrible misogynistic thing now, but I thought it was a really interesting game at the time. Yeah, the chatter said that Jane Jensen, part of the reason she doesn't do games anymore, I interviewed Jane, part of the reason she doesn't do games anymore is she's doing great writing gay erotica. And I sign of the times, right? I mean, if there's a market and she's good at it, I mean, the largest consumers of gay erotica are women. So I have another friend who is an award-winning writer who writes gay porn under a pseudonym. Is it gay porn? I don't remember. I know there's some what they call dubcon, dubious consent stuff and things like that, but they write it under a pen name to make money because people will read it. People are curious about sex. We're such a sex repressed society that people seek out knowledge through fiction. And, again, that's my thing, because there's a huge difference between having they call them rape fantasies, but they really are in fact trust fantasies. The ability to trust that someone will do that, and if you ask them to stop, they would. That's really what that's about. Not because I was actually going for, it's not the Scream. I realized it looks like that. I was going for the end of the Indiana Jones movie. You know, the guy's face melts. That's what I was going for. But okay, we'll call it the Scream. That looked more like a whatever. But yeah, this is one of these things, and it's so cool that I have a channel that's predominantly male dominated, and look what we're talking about. And this is why I think that these, rape myths that all men are potential rapists and all men secretly want to, I mean, God, read Kathy Young's takedown of The Fall about, modern faux feminism. It's spot freaking out. I think she's a little too kind to the series personally. I think that Gillian Anderson's character on that show is as much a predator. Well, she's not a violent predator, but she's guilty of serial workplace sexual harassment. Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where somebody says, be interested in hearing your thoughts portraying rape fantasies in media sometime. I've touched on rape fantasy in some of my video game stuff. I try really hard to confine my analysis to video game stuff or geek stuff, because if we start blowing open the whole thing, it is decidedly different analyzing something in a science fiction or fantasy setting where world building is such a critical part of it, as opposed to something that's like based on our world. And yeah, the Kathy Young article on Heat Street. Part of the thing I like about big worlds is that you see these different cultures and they all have different opinions on something. And I think that's super cool, because we're not getting one take on the issue. We're not getting a lecture by the author from Yeah, okay, we'll wrap up. The stream's starting to not buffer properly for people, but I like seeing the different approaches to things. Like, I love the Dragon Age world because, you know, the elves have a completely different social structure than the dwarves and the Qunari, and I was so disappointed by Inquisition because they say you can play as a Qunari, but no, you're playing as a Tal Vashoth mercenary, which means you lose all the role-playing fun of being a member of a totally alien culture. But we will do this again. We're picking up more and more people. And we'll have to do this again because 90 people, that's a lot. But thanks, guys. I did have more things written down about the stuff for the week. Yeah, I've heard the content criticism of the Conan game. Conan is Conan. That's an established universe. And yes, there are some things that are not part of our social norms, but that is, what's the world? Hyborian? That's the world. That's the world. And if you don't like the Conan universe, don't play Conan games. It's just like if you don't like the world of Grand Theft Auto, don't play Grand Theft Auto. Play Saints Row or play Watch Dogs or other crime games out there. Just because it's the most popular one doesn't mean you have to like it. It's not my favorite game. I am totally straight up Saints Row, straight up Saints Row, Watch Dogs. Don't care for Grand Theft Auto much. Not colorful enough for me in the way I like. I like games with like giant energy drink cans named Paul as sub bosses. Energy drink. But yeah, so I'm not gonna chew the fat on Conan from a gender perspective. It's been an established universe for so long, and there are people who are massive fans because they have a nostalgia for it, and that's fine. But people have different tastes, and people should be able to explore the worlds that they find fun without people extrapolating some sort of moral judgment, because I'm going to get into GTA more in the Lady Bits series, but it is so much a collection of stuff. It's just part, and there isn't a ton of cohesion in Grand Theft Auto game. As some people say, like the ridiculous fun you can have going around with the crazy physics in the original games and running over people and all that stuff is really out of step with the super serious, male tears type stories they keep putting in these games, and that's what puts me off them. Like, it's just, am I supposed to be really into it, or am I supposed to be having fun with it? And the original Watch Dogs made that mistake too. And the driving was terrible. But the second game was much more much more fun faced. Would I do an interview with Monday and Matt? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny because some of the YouTubers I originally concentrated on, nobody got back to me. And I just sort of thought that YouTubers don't share, but Matt's one of the few that actually talks to me on Twitter. So that's cool. Yeah, but I'm interested in talking to Rich next week from Review Tech USA, because that seems like it's going to be a cool one. And I like talking to other YouTubers. I think it's good to sort of exchange ideas and just have conversations. I'm so tired of everything. You only talk to each other if it's a debate. Fight me. And I won't do that. I want to be able to have a discussion where it's not about convincing. It's about sitting down and having a discussion and raising points and having somebody else raise points and getting a common understanding. And you can't do that when you're trying to win the debate. And so I just don't Other people can do the format. That's fine. That's why there's lots of other people. There's lots of other media where you can consume that. But I think that conversations are best had. And if you care about, guests and things like that, we do a lot of this stuff through the Patreon channels, through Patreon Thursdays and all this stuff. So $1 a month, you can be in on those discussions. Somebody wants to see Momo. Give me a second. Loki's closer than Momo. It's going to completely terrify him, but hang on, I'll get Loki. Momo will probably come up the minute I move. I'll be back. Come on, baby. Come on. Here's Loki. We have Loki. Yes, buddy. Loki's like, look, Loki, a camera. Yes. Greatest thing. Yes, Loki. Look. Yeah. All right. Say hi, Loki. Hi. Loki loves cameras. Don't you, Loki? Yes. Don't you see him in his glory? Totally in his glory. Yeah. Being all chill. You don't want me to put Loki on my head because Loki actually has a very large dog peen, and it's a bit weird. I try to shoot around it because it's like, man, I feel like my dog needs pants. Yeah, Loki does look something like Trico. He's got these big, long chicken legs. Right, Loki? Yeah. Yeah, buddy. Oh, you're loving this. Okay. Right, Loki? Yeah, there's the camera you pretend you forgot about. Yep. Yep. No, I am not flashing dog peen. Absolutely. Oh, there's Momo. Okay, gonna get Momo. Here we go. Come on, Momo. Okay. There's Momo. All right. Momo likes the camera a lot less. There he is. All right, Momo. There we go. There's Momo. Yeah. Wonder if we can get his grunting on camera. Momo vocalizes. I don't know if anybody else has cats that vocalize, but Momo's the first one that put Momo on head. Momo on head. Oh, God. This is heavy. Okay. Ugh. Momo is a giant cat. Okay. I don't know if you can hear him. Somebody asked me to put Momo on my head. Momo has a very civilized cat penis. It tucks in for convenient storage. So, yeah, I know about that King Momo thing in Brazilian culture. It's funny because we went through a few names with Momo. Momo likes Momo. And Momo isn't apparently a type of breed of cat called a ragamuffin. And they have an extra fat pad on their tummy. Trico, somebody asked in the chat, Trico is the animal character in The Last Guardian. So there's Momo, and I'm gonna wrap because this has been like an hour and a half. But thank you guys. This was really sorry I didn't get to all the questions. I know some sort of flew by. We'll have to figure out how to let people submit questions in advance, but you get a lot more access. Again, I said you get a lot more access on Patreon. We do Patreon specific Thursdays, and we have an ongoing chat through Patreon as well. So there's a great messaging service on Patreon. No pressure, just money's good, right, Momo? Money buys cat food. And Momo loves his cat food. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.